Hi everyone, Fraser here from the Most Dangerous Podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps us to reach more people like you who love the show. Also, you can follow us on Instagram at The Most Dangerous Pod and join the conversation on Facebook at The Most Dangerous Podcast. For those of you who want to go the extra mile, we're on Buy Me a Coffee. So if you'd like to support the show with a small donation, it would mean the world to us. And if you have any suggestions or feedback and want to get in touch, you can email us at jamesandfraserpod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. I had a hamster called Vladimir Lenin.
Yeah. Hello and welcome back to the Most Dangerous Podcast. This is, I suppose it's part 2 of last week's fiasco because we didn't get to finish it because of your dog.
My dog, yes. She's a lovely little dog. But so she was a chit last week, as you all heard. We had a little discussion and we thought, you know what, fuck it. Let's put out what happened so that people believe us, that we haven't just fucked it off and couldn't be arsed doing an episode, so you all got to hear like the troubles we had with this.
Yeah, it was a bit of a disaster, but we're back this week with what should have happened last week, and it's the final episode of the Most Dangerous Leaders of People.
It is, and I'm excited because I've been waiting for this now for 2 weeks, and so what I've done the equivalent of, did you ever make your baby's milk a little bit thicker in the evening?
Pardon?
Put like you remember when you're giving your baby a bottle and you put like an extra half spoon of the powder in to make it a bit thicker because you think that'll keep them asleep for longer?
I can't remember. It's such a long time ago now.
Well, what I did this evening is I took my dog on a slightly longer walk and I gave her a little bit more of the dried food tonight when I fed her. So she's now unconscious in her dog bed.
That's good. Yeah. It's
giving me some peace and quiet.
That's the way to do it. I think I mentioned to you off air that I'm not feeling too great today, so I think it's COVID. No one tests anymore for COVID, do they? But I'm convinced because I've been ill for about a week.
Yeah.
So bear with me. I'll struggle through this. I've got a bit of brain fog as well, so if I make mistakes, I'm very sorry. But it's free, so sue me.
Yeah, you're not going to get your money back, are you? Yeah. Do you know? I thought I had about a month. Maybe a bit more than that. I had all the kind of symptoms and I was like, I might have COVID. And someone said to me, you better get tested. So why?
Yeah, what difference does it make?
Go and spend £5 on a test. But you don't isolate, you get on with things.
Yeah.
You go, oh wow, I've got COVID. Right, well, nothing fucking changes.
Yeah, so I've not tested, but I'm convinced. I feel like it's doing the rounds again, isn't it? So,
yeah.
But anyway, so let's rattle through this, shall we? Just so
okay.
I can then sort of go and feel sorry for myself.
Go and get into bed. Okay, we'll take it away, James. Who have we got this week for our last part of Leaders of People?
Okay, so this guy, right? So it's not actually the most dangerous one of the most dangerous leaders of people per se.
Right.
It's a bit of I've gone for a bit of a curveball on this one, but it's through his incompetence and his lack of leadership and arrogance, I suppose, which led to perhaps a significant turning point in history and sort of led on perhaps to the most dangerous leaders of people sort of further down the line just purely because of this chap.
Yeah.
And the guy that I've picked is Nicholas II, and he was the Tsar of Russia.
Excellent. He was on my list.
Was he really?
Yes, he was very, very close to being one that I did when I did King Farouk.
Right, okay.
And I'm not saying I thought King Farouk was better. I just couldn't really decide between them. And
yeah.
So I'm excited for this.
Did you have a look into him whilst you were deciding?
I didn't look deep into him. I sounds weird. He sort of came up because, like you've just pointed out, I was looking for someone a bit calamitous, a bit, someone that, like you said, kind of led to other things happening. And I liked the idea of him, but I didn't read too much into it because I decided not I decided to do Farouk
Okay.
instead.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not going to go too much into his sort of life and stuff, but I'm going to talk. So, as you're probably aware, anyone who's listening, so Nicholas II was the last Tsar of Russia, and his sort of downfall led to the creation of the Soviet Union, basically. Obviously, there's a dramatic shift in world history. You had the Russian Revolution, and the abdication of Nicholas II ended more than 300 years of the Romanov rule. So not particularly dangerous, but completely destroyed the Russian royal family, and ultimately the creation of was not single-handedly, but contributed considerably to the creation of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. Now, sorry, just 1 second. I've had to unplug my computer because just as I was getting set up tonight, my dog bit right through the charger for my laptop.
Okay.
Which I've managed to sellotape back together and get it working, but now it's fully charged. It's going, so I've just unplugged it. So
I think the moral of the story seems to be: don't get a dog.
Don't get a puppy. No,
by the sounds of things.
Yeah, she's a little arse. Back to Nicholas. Am I right? Is this the guy that caused all the trouble where family members had to go into hiding, that was covered in an episode of Downton Abbey that I watched a little while ago? Was it round about the 20s, 30s?
It was before that. So the Russian Revolution was 1917.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That would have been early in Downton Abbey, I suppose, because the First World War features in that.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out. I don't think so, but maybe. I didn't watch Downton. So this is just all about the reasons why his dynasty fell, I suppose. The reasons why there was ultimately leading to this revolution which created the Soviet Union. And now his fall from grace, it wasn't sudden. It was just a collection of mismanagement of politics, economics, social challenges that have been brewing for decades, poor leadership, and also the disastrous involvement of Russia in World War One. So there's multiple causes as to why this happened, this collapse. I think you've got to remember as well. I don't know if I'll come on to this. I can't. The thing is, I had all this set up last week, and I've not looked at it for a week, so I can't remember what I put down now. So I might come on to this before, but you've got to remember this is a period in time where the rest of Europe is kind of modernising. In the Industrial Revolution in the UK, and this sort of, I'd say, democratic system set up in sort of Western Europe, in France and Germany, in the UK as well. Not in the sense that we know today, but you didn't have kings and queens ruling over their subjects per se.
Yeah.
So when Nicholas II inherited the throne, Russia itself, it was kind of like he inherited this just autocracy. Russia hadn't changed at all through the ages. For 300 years, it had been king, queen, subjects. They rule their lavish lifestyle. It's a vast country, as we all know. It still is a multi-ethnic empire. It remained largely feudal and agricultural. So well into the late 19th and early 20th century, the large parts of the population were farmers, basically. Whereas if you look at other, like I say, Western countries, perhaps more people were moving away from farmland and working in factories and towns and cities.
Sorry to interrupt. What was Russia's land like at the time? I mean, were things like Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, were they all part of Russia at the time, or was it more like Russia is now? Because did the Soviet Union expand and swallow up those countries and then shrink again? Or
I had it up last week. I can't remember where the borders were, so you'll have to look that one up yourself. Apologies. Yeah. I think it did. It's like a huge. It's an empire basically. So it had various different countries. I don't know which ones exactly, but it had various pockets of different cultures and things like that.
Yeah.
Now there were efforts by Alexander II, which is Nicholas's grandfather, to try and modernize Russia. And he introduced legislation, I think that's the right word for it, called the Emancipation of the Serfs in 1861.
Right.
Now, what this policy was, so before that, so the serfs were basically like farmers, but they were slaves,
Right.
So you'd have rich landowners, and then farmers would farm their land, but essentially the landowners owned everything that they farmed. And the serfs, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't even get married without permission from the landowners.
Right.
So they just live on the land, farm the land, but were basically slaves to the landowners. Now, in 1861, Alexander II introduced this policy and said, okay, well, the serfs were going to emancipate you, and you can own the land rather than be slaves. He's trying to modernize the country and say, look, we want a country of landowners and farmers. So following that, in 1861, these peasants, these serfs, could run businesses, they could get married. Basically, what they would do is pay a tax to the landlord rather than be slaves.
Right.
It's kind of like a ground rent, I suppose.
Yeah.
But we'll find out later it didn't really work. Landowners would just basically just give them the shittest bit of land and say, all right, you want to be free, do you? Farm that then.
Yeah.
Or they'd just like their tax would just be so high that it'd end up with negative equity and they'd own more tax than the land would be worth. So yeah, he tried to revolutionise it, but it just failed.
Right.
And as I say, you've got people as well are sort of starting to learn to read. There's more sort of social networking, if you like, to coin a phrase. Not so much as we get now, but people were starting to communicate with outside sort of pockets of society.
Yeah.
People looking over to the West and going, oh, hang on, they've got houses over there and they're working in factories, and it seems like, all right, not great lives, but it's better than us starving, sort of freezing over here.
Yeah.
So there's a lot sort of happening, particularly in the West. Whereas in Russia, the Tsar, through the ages, up to Nicholas II, has absolute power.
Yeah.
So Nicholas II became the Tsar in 1894 after the death of his father, Alexander III. So we've got Alexander II, Alexander III, and then Nicholas II.
Okay.
That's the clear timeline. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the death of Alexander III is potentially one of the biggest turning points in Russian history, because Nicholas took over the throne. He was relatively young at the time, just 26, and he was completely ill-prepared for the complexities of ruling such a mass, diverse empire. Now, Alexander, Nicholas's father, is quite an interesting character. He died when he was only 49, and it was quite a shock sort of through the nation and further afield as well, through the various countries. But then looking into it, I don't really understand why it was a shock, to be honest, because from what I read, he was a raging alcoholic. He actually, this is just rumour, I don't know if it's true, but he actually had a special boot made for him so that he could carry a bottle of vodka in it. So he could just sort of, and then we'd be in like meetings and stuff, and he just pulled this bottle of vodka out of his boot and just have a swig and then put it back there. So yeah, it was deemed a shock at the time, but perhaps in retrospect it wasn't. He was actually advised to stop drinking by his doctors because his liver was failing, but he didn't, and his liver did fail. That's what he died of. So Nicholas comes to the throne at a very relatively young age. 26. It's when you're 26, you think you're that old, don't you? But you're not.
I was just, when you said that, I actually, like you said, I think back from when, like when you're 26, you think, like, I'm an adult and I know this and I know that. And now I'm like 42.
Yeah, you're looking at 26-year-olds going, you don't know anything new. Yeah,
fuck all. It's like, you're still just a kid. And someone said to me something about, you shouldn't be allowed to be like an MP until you're like 50 because fuck all about the world. And I thought, that's fucking ageist, that. You get really good MPs in their 20s and stuff. And I think sometimes I think about it, I think, yeah, maybe, but...
Yeah, I don't know. You need like a diverse cross-section of society,
Yeah.
Just all old people, then they're just going to do old people thing. He's not old people, 50, so not far off that ourselves, are we? But, you know what I mean? I think, anyway. So, So Nicholas himself, he adhered strongly to the principles of autocracy, and he believed that he had a divine right to rule. So usually with royal families, they're selected by God, aren't they, to rule the country? And this is what Nicholas believed. He believed that, you know, he was picked, he was the chosen one by God to rule over Russia. However, he lacked the political acumen and the decisiveness that the position required. His leadership was characterized by indecision, and he just relied on a small group of advisors, like we were saying before. There's no diversity there, you know, and his refusal to make significant political concessions, even when reform was apparent.
Wow. But it's like you just said, though, about his age. Again, he just wasn't prepared to be.
Yeah.
And I think,
usually,
usually
when someone's sort of lined up to be the next in line for the throne, you'd expect they'd kind of get training from an early age. But I don't think this really happened. I think because the family were so caught up in the divine right, they just thought, well, it's God's will, it's God's wish, that it'll just happen. You know, I think in today's, if you look at our royal family, they start getting like media training and stuff like early on, don't they?
Yeah, but they're made to go and, I mean, haven't Prince Harry and Prince William both been in active combat in the army and stuff like that? And
I think Nicholas did go.
Training
Nicholas did do some military training, but again, I think it was a case of, well, you just sit there and sit there for a year, and you know. But I think Harry actually was on front line at one point.
He was in Afghanistan, wasn't he?
I think it was Afghanistan.
But it's a little bit of grounding for them, isn't it? And they make them go and do things. Whereas, you know, you go back to King Farouk, he was just a spoilt kid that basically just got the controls, didn't he? In the end, he was like, he went mental with it. Yeah,
that's a similar sort of scenario, I guess. So Nicholas, the Tsar's failure to modernise the political system and even grant limited democratic rights was a major contributing factor to his downfall. In the face of growing unrest, strikes, and calls for reform, Nicholas chose to uphold the status quo, further alienating his subjects. His inflexibility was especially evident in the events leading up to and following the Revolution of 1905, and a precursor to the eventual collapse to the Romanov dynasty.
Right. So,
moving on then. So the Revolution of 1905. So this isn't the actual Russian Revolution as we know it. They had a practice revolution.
A pre-revolution.
Pre-revolution.
That's like when you get up in the morning and do a preliminary poo.
It's like, we'll practice this one. So between the years of 1904 and 1905, Russia was at war with Japan.
Right.
Now, this war was a complete and utter disaster for Russia. They lost loads of men. You know, they were ill-prepared, poorly equipped. I even read it, like I said, I had it last week, but I can't remember the exact name of the ship now. So one of the ships, like a big battleship, sailed from Russia in the Mediterranean, you know, sort of where Greece is around there.
Yeah.
So the Balkans, is that what it's called?
I think so.
So Mediterranean, down past Africa, round the Horn of Africa, up. I got to Madagascar, and they were so didn't have any provisions, so they were like, "Can we stop here?" I think France were running Madagascar at the time. Yeah, they were like, "No, we don't want anything to do with this war. This is between you."
Barbecue a couple of lemurs in Madagascar.
France refused Russia to sort of stop there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they were like, "No, we don't. It's between you and Japan." No. So it's a lot of hoo-ha. Eventually, France said, "Okay, yeah, you can restock here." So it stopped there, all the way up to India, round through to Japan. Took them about 3 months to get there. As soon as they got there, the Russians sank the ship. So, imagine reading that in the next day, the papers oh fucking hell. So so that's just an example of it was just the huge losses, poorly equipped soldiers. It was completely pointless. As well, I mean, I don't know if I can mention this, but they were a bit racist towards the Japanese as well.
Right.
You know, because they look different. So they're like, how can we be losing to like these people? You know, these Japanese people. Look at us. Where. You know. Now, another reason why it's a major disaster is that it's hard to do with sort of in a podcast without sort of showing you a map. But there's a bit of territory that they wanted, and Japan wanted as well, because Japan never used to just be that island. Japan used to occupy a bit of China as well, so it actually bordered Russia.
Yeah, we talked about this in the Unit 731, was it? Japan, China, and Russia were kind of always squabbling over like the same sort of bit of land, and sometimes.
That's right, yeah. So I think it's probably a similar thing, yeah. So it's probably a similar bit of land.
Where that unit was, at one stage had been Russia, then it had been China, then it was Japan, then it was Russia again, then it was Japan, and they were all squabbling over this.
It's going to be that territory.
Yeah.
So, so before the war started, Japan sort of said, "Oh, okay, we'll compromise. You have that bit, we have this bit. You know, then we don't have to go to war." And Russia were like, "No, we want all of it." So they,
it's unlike them.
Yeah. So they went to war and lost the war to Japan, and ended up just losing all of it.
Yeah.
So it's like, you could have just had a bit of it, but you wanted all of it, and now you've lost all of it.
Yeah.
So it's just seen as a complete and utter disaster, the Japanese war. On top of this, you had the economic hardship, you know, as we mentioned, with the peasants. You know, it's a very hard life. And then this growing dissatisfaction of the autocratic system. You've got these wealthy aristocrats, the royal family, who are swanning about in sort of gold carriages and having wonderful feasts. And then you've got these peasants who are like farming potatoes and hoping for the best in freezing conditions. Yeah. So on the 22nd of January 1905, a peaceful protest led by Father George Gapon, demanding better working conditions, civil liberties and political reform, was met by brutal violence in what became known as Bloody Sunday. So it's not the same Bloody Sunday as the Irish one. It's
so Russia did it first.
Yeah, so basically they had a protest, and it was a really peaceful protest, and I think there were like people selling beer, and you know, it was just like a bit of a day out festival type thing. But the Tsar's troops got spooked by something and ended up opening fire on the protesters.
Yeah, these things always go out of hand, don't they?
Yeah. So this massacre is a massacre. Yeah. So it sparked outrage. This was in St. Petersburg. It sparked outrage across the country, leading to a wave of general strikes, protests, and uprisings. So you know, this simmering tension, right? So there's been these series of uprisings, but it's not organised. There's just pockets of people kind of, this isn't good enough. We're not having this anymore. So in response to this unrest, Nicholas II was forced to make concessions, and he created something called the October Manifesto. Now, the October Manifesto promised the creation of a Duma, so this is a Russian parliament,
right?
The expansion of civil liberties, and to some degree of political participation. But these reforms, they were mostly superficial. Nicholas retained significant powers, and often if he didn't get his way, he just dissolved the parliament. Wow. You know, if his authority was challenged, it was like, get out, I'm in charge. So he didn't ever resolve the underlying problems of hunger, worker exploitation. You know, this national discontent was still there. It's not being resolved by this.
I think these people that like the kings and stuff that have got the golden carriages and all the food and stuff, they always get a bad rep because, like, you know, people are like, but you people are starving and all that. But human nature, I think there's many people out there that would have all that and would give it up for the people.
But nobody's asking him to give it all up.
No, I know, but you know, it's the fear, isn't it? If you give a little bit, what if they take more? And
so you get some good kings and politicians, I suppose. You know, like, yeah, nobody's saying he's not allowed anything. You know,
yeah.
I think people, particularly in that era, would believe that he was picked by God to rule the country, but but they're starving as well. So come on, you're eating duck à l'orange every night, and I'm having to find a rotten potato in the ground just so I've got some substance. It just doesn't, Yeah. I mean, this should have been a warning to Nicholas, really. That reforms were necessary. You could see that there was problems. He's just arrogant, I suppose, and young. He's not just cut out for this, really. And as soon as the civil unrest sort of started to settle down a bit, and people started going back to their normal lives, he just dissolved the Duma completely. Just went back to the original ways. I think we did touch on this sort of earlier anyway, but it's just about the social economic hardships and the social discontent. So, like I say, Russia itself was a predominantly agricultural society. Most people living in rural areas. I mentioned about the emancipation of the serfs, but again, that didn't resolve things. That was back in 1861, and still up to 1905, things weren't resolved. And again, like I say, there was people were looking across to the Western countries in Britain, and there's like the start of labour movements, which I know your family were heavily involved in, and labour strikes, the demand for more workers' rights and things like that. And these people in Russia are starting to go, well, we want a bit of that as well. So why aren't we being given this? And the government or the royal family, I suppose, just weren't addressing these problems. The aristocracy, which controlled much of the land and the wealth, it's just increasingly seen out of touch. They were spending lots of money when there was people starving in the streets. Completely out of touch with the needs of the ordinary Russians, which I suppose sounds pretty familiar to today, to be honest.
It does, yeah.
Which is quite scary.
It's still going on.
Yeah. But I mean, this is what happens, because at some point people will break.
Yeah, it's the old there's the 1% club just now, isn't there?
Yeah. So it's only so far people will be pushed. But I think the ultimate breaking point for Nicholas was perhaps Russia's involvement in World War One. So the outbreak of World War One in 1914 was a pivotal moment for Russia and the Russian Empire. Initially, there was a surge of patriotic support for the war, and many Russians rallied behind the Tsar. However,
I was just going to say, were the Russians in World War One? Were they fighting with or against Germany?
They were against Germany.
Yeah, so they're right. Okay.
Yeah. It wasn't Germany though, was it? It was like Ottoman Empire and all this.
Everyone knows it was Germany, but
it
was Prussia, the Prussian, wasn't it? Prussia or something? Germany, Hungary, Austria, that were all kind of part of the same.
Yeah.
Thing.
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know. Did it in school?
I don't know much. But
I just remember the bit about the trenches.
That's it.
Yeah. Send them over the top. Use up their bullets.
Yeah.
But
I'm not too familiar with that side of things. It's more our
Yeah.
side of things. Yeah. But I think they were against the sort of German forces. So at the beginning there was loads of patriotic support, but the war quickly turned to disaster for Russia. So the military was ill prepared for the scale and how modern the conflict was.
Right.
So the Russian army itself suffered devastating defeats at the hands of the German forces, most notably in the Battle of Tannenberg in 1914.
Right.
Now, again, I had this up. Yeah, I know, sorry. So from what I think, just off the top of my head, because I can't be bothered looking it up, the Battle of Tannenberg, I think Russian forces lost, I think it was about 120,000 casualties,
wow,
which was pretty much the entire force, the regiment. Whereas I think the Germans were about 40,000 or something.
Yeah,
it's just I can't remember. You'd have to look it up, but it was just a complete and utter disaster, basically.
Yeah,
it got battered. Yeah. So as the war dragged on, Russia's already fragile economy crumbled under the strain of mobilising millions of men and supplying the front lines. Food shortages, inflation, and logistical failures led to widespread hunger and discontent on the home front.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 1915, the Tsar Nicholas decides to take personal command of the Russian army. Like,
I'll sort it.
Do it.
I've been playing cannon fodder. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, so that was 1915, and he had no military experience, or barely any, so he just simply wasn't suited to lead the war effort.
Yeah.
Now, the decision for him to go to the front line also left the government in the hands of his wife.
Right.
Now, she was called Alexandra, Empress Alexandra. Now, she was a German, which obviously wasn't going down too well with the Russian people. And she had a controversial advisor called Rasputin.
Right.
You've probably heard of Rasputin.
I know the name, yeah.
Bodhi M, Rah Rasputin and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was like the mad monk. He was a bit kind of a weird fella. You could probably do a pod on him, to be honest. He called him the mad monk. He was a bit of a mystical fella. He's quite brutal, and apparently they had an affair. Apparently that was the rumours.
Oh, really? Right.
But he had a lot of control over Alexandra, and sort of would whisper in her ear, tell her what to do and which direction to take for policy-wise and things like that. So the Russian people didn't like Rasputin at all.
Right.
So this damaged the credibility and the reputation of the monarchy. So obviously Nicholas is over there, trying to do something with the war effort. Alexandra's over in St. Petersburg, being told by Rasputin what to do. Rasputin's seen as corrupt, manipulative. You can say there was rumours of an improper relationship.
Right.
So the public trust, improper. Whatever that is. So public trust being completely eroded. So the war effort continued to falter, and by 1917, the Russian army was completely demoralised. There's widespread desertions and mutinies. The war had drained the empire of resources, exposed the weakness of the government, and it created a deep divide between the Tsar and his subjects. So by early 1917, so World War I ended in 1918, didn't it?
Yes, yeah.
So this is still while World War I's ongoing. So by early 1917, Russia was on the brink of collapse. Food shortages in cities like Petrograd, which was formerly St. Petersburg, and I think they renamed it St. Petersburg. Stalingrad, I think, at one point.
Somewhere I'd love to visit St. Petersburg. I mean, not right now, but it's supposed to be a beautiful city.
I'd love to go to Russia for a visit, yeah. I've always wanted to go. Food shortages. Can't even speak. Food shortages in cities like Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg, had reached critical levels, and public frustration with the war, the government, and the monarchy was at an all-time high. On February 23rd, 1917, International Women's Day, a demonstration in Petrograd sparked a series of protests and strikes. Workers, soldiers, and ordinary citizens took to the streets, demanding bread, peace, and the abdication of the Tsar. The situation quickly escalated as the police and military were unable to restore order, and in many cases, soldiers sympathised with the protesters and refused to fire on them, further undermining Nicholas's authority. On March 2nd, 1917, under the pressure from military leaders, political elites, and the Duma, Nicholas II was forced to abdicate the throne. Initially, he abdicated in favour of his son, Alexei, but it soon became clear that Alexei's haemophilia would make it impossible for him to rule.
Haemophilia?
It's a blood defect.
That's where your blood doesn't congeal, isn't it? And if you get a small cut, you can bleed to death.
Yeah. Much more serious back then, I imagine.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Nicholas then named his brother, Grand Duke Michael, as his successor. However, Michael refused the throne. No chance, mate.
You're right.
And this effectively ends the Romanov dynasty and leaves Russia without a monarch. The abdication of Nicholas II marked the end of the Russian Empire and the beginning of a new uncertain period. A provisional government led by Alexander Kerensky took control, but it was weak and divided, struggling to maintain order and continue the war effort. Meanwhile, radical groups like the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, gained increasing influence, setting the stage for the October Revolution later that year. So the provisional government's decision to continue fighting in World War I proved to be a fatal mistake. The war remained deeply unpopular, and as military defeats mounted and the economic situation worsened, support for the government eroded. The Bolsheviks, who had promised peace, land and bread, capitalised on this discontent. In October 1917, Lenin and the Bolsheviks led a coup against the provisional government, seizing power in Petrograd and declaring the establishment of a socialist state. The fall of the Romanov dynasty and the rise of the Bolsheviks marks the beginning of the Russian Civil War, which lasted between 1917 and 1923. This is a brutal conflict between the Red Army, the Bolsheviks, and the White Army, which was a loose coalition of anti-Bolshevik forces.
Mm-hmm.
Never really organised, whereas the Bolsheviks knew exactly what they wanted and what they wanted to do. The war devastated Russia, claiming millions of lives and further destabilising the country. And then in 1918, Nicholas II and his family were executed by the Bolshevik forces. And then obviously symbolically closing the chapter on the Romanov dynasty.
So what year was that?
That was 1918. So he abdicated in 1917. There was a revolution in October 1917 when the Bolsheviks staged a coup.
Yeah.
Civil war broke out. The Bolsheviks captured Nicholas II and executed him and his family.
Yeah, because I know Downton Abbey's a stupid program, but I remember an episode of that where like other members of the family did have to flee and get out of Russia and seek like refuge and stuff like that. And
Civil war,
yeah.
It's, apparently the Tsar Nicholas and his family were executed by firing squad.
Right.
But apparently it was really brutal. It's Nicholas, Alexandra, and I think there were 5 children.
Right.
Executed by firing squad, but it took half an hour.
Shit.
So they weren't just executed by firing squad.
Mm-hmm.
One of the daughters was called Anastasia. I don't know if you've heard of her before.
No.
So there were a bit of like an urban myth through the 20th century was that she survived.
Right. And
she was living in hiding. But in the late 1980s, early 1990s, their bodies were discovered, and Anastasia was in with the body. So the Bolsheviks killed him and just threw him down a mine shaft, basically.
Yeah.
And they were never seen of again, and then they were later found in the sort of late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, right. As recent as that?
Yeah. So they just completely disposed of. What a fall from grace, right?
Yeah, just chucked in the bin, basically, isn't it?
Yeah. So the fall of Tsar Nicholas II had far-reaching consequences, not only for Russia but for the world. The collapse of the Russian Empire and subsequent Bolshevik revolution led to the establishment of the Soviet Union in 1922. And then, as we all know, this would go on to become one of the most powerful and influential states of the 20th century. The rise of communism in Russia also had a profound impact on global politics, contributing to the ideological struggle of the Cold War. Domestically, the fall of the Romanov dynasty brought an end to centuries of autocratic rule in Russia, but also led to years of chaos, civil war and repression. The Soviet regime under leaders like Lenin and later Joseph Stalin would implement radical social and economic changes, but at the cost of millions of lives. The promise of peace, land and bread were never fully realised for many Russians, as the new regime imposed its own form of dictatorship and repression.
The Soviet Union, that was still very much about when we were young, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that's the fall of the Berlin Wall, was the breakup
Right,
of the Soviet Union.
So that was what, 1990, 1989?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
So from 2022 up until that point.
Have you ever been to Berlin?
I've been to Berlin, yeah. It's very strange.
Yeah, I loved it. One of my favourite places I've ever visited. Beautiful city and stuff, but you can literally stand on where the wall is, and the buildings are different and everything.
Yeah, there's the different types, different architecture, isn't there? There's two parts of the city. You've got the western side, and then obviously the sort of square block buildings of the Soviets.
Yeah,
and it's very, very noticeable.
Loved it, though. Beautiful city.
Yeah, it's a great place, worth a visit. I mean, you mentioned you had a hamster called Vladimir Lenin.
Yeah.
No, he's a very controversial figure, Lenin, because it's difficult to say. It's too simplistic to say, was he a good guy, was he a bad guy? You know, he was a smart guy, an intelligent guy who'd read the Communist Manifesto, you know, by Karl Marx and Engels, can't remember the chap's first name, and he saw this ideology. So communism, in terms of Karl Marx, the idea was that the world would naturally evolve into socialism and then naturally develop into communism. So Leninism, a form of communism, is slightly different in the sense that what he wanted to do is he wanted to force this communist revolution. He believed that socialism was already taking place, and that what he wanted to do, rather than a natural progression into communism, he would force it. Now, for me, like I say, it's too simplistic to say whether he was a good guy or a bad guy, because people died. You know, he executed the royal family, and there was a civil war and things like that. But I think, if you think about it in this respect, this guy, his sole aim was to ensure that his home country was good, and he wanted to look after people and make sure everyone was fed, and he had this ideology. And that's it can be crazy. And it's only the Joseph Stalin. I mean, okay, you can argue against that, but I think Joseph Stalin went down a different route of this sort of absolute power, kind of I'm in charge type thing. So we'll wrap up because the dog's waking up.
So what we're saying is Lenin had good intentions, but kind of did it wrong.
Potentially, yeah. In my view, I think.
I had no idea who he was when I called my hamster Vladimir Lenin.
Really? It's like one of the most sort of important figures of the 20th century, like Russian history. I think.
I mean, I knew who he was, but I didn't know his story. You know,
it's worth reading up on him. I think I'm not sure how I feel about him. Call me a commie if you want. Right, okay. So just finally, so I can just breathe normally, get this out of the system. So the fall of Tsar Nicholas II was the result of a complex interplay of political, economic, social, and military factors. Nicholas's inability to adapt to the demands of changing society, his disastrous decision-making during World War I, and his failure to heed the lessons of the 1905 revolution all contributed to the collapse of the Romanov dynasty. I keep saying destiny instead of dynasty.
It's because you're reading it. You know, if you probably weren't reading it, you wouldn't do it.
I'm not reading it. It's all in my head.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry.
The Russian Revolution that followed not only transformed Russia, but had a lasting impact on the course of world history. The fall of the Tsar marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new and turbulent period in Russian and global politics. And that is why I've picked Nicholas II to be on my list of one of the most dangerous leaders of people.
Excellent. So if you'd have given bread to the people...
If you just listen to the people, you know, it's a couple of reforms. Actually, maybe have a government. Like I say, the governments in the UK and stuff, they're not like everyone can have a vote, and, you know, still mostly landowners and only certain people can vote and stuff, but at least it looks like progression. I think in like any walk of life, it's not so much about what you do, it's kind of what you say, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, if you're saying the right things, and at least it looks like there's some progression, then perhaps it would have been different. I can see you're distracted, Fraser.
I'm not distracted. I'm praying she just doesn't start chewing the wires or anything like that and interrupting your podcast here.
Well, it's done now, so she can sod off. She's not wrecking my podcast again. That's not bad timing, I suppose.
No, it was really interesting. It's all history that.
It was a bit of an A-level essay on why did the Tsar fall, but there we go.
Yeah, but it's all history that I was aware of but didn't know about, if that makes sense. I was aware. I just think
it rings true to some of the circumstances today.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of discontent in society and a lot of people feeling like they're being treated unfairly, and they're getting a bit of a bum deal and they're paying taxes and they're not getting their worth out of it.
Yeah.
And it just we're not saying a revolution would happen today, I'm sure, but I think it just goes to show that the people only take so much. There's a certain point, there is a tipping point, and if governments and the powers that be don't listen and don't make necessary changes, then people will kick off and things do change. So I'd like to leave on. Yeah, there we go. Let's end on a positive note then.
Go on.
So even though
what I was going to say then.
well, you go first then.
What I was going to say is that the sad thing is nowadays, back then people would die for change. People would fight and die for a better world for their kids and other people and stuff like that. And nowadays, I think people just take it because they're not willing to put their own lives on the line for change.
No, I don't agree with that. No, I don't agree with that. It's because you're comfortable. Because everybody generally is comfortable. You're not living like a Russian peasant. You're not digging through like cow shit to try and find something to eat. You've got a roof over your head, and all right, you might not be making as much money as you want, or you might not have all the things you want, but you're all right. If you don't want to kick the hornet's nest because you're fine. I'm fine. I've got a roof over my head. Everything's great. I've got a computer and a microphone, which I'm talking through right now. And I can pretty much get whatever I want.
Yeah.
But if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, then people will rise up and revolt. So that's where I wanted to end on a positive note.
Go on then.
In that, quickly then, the power of people, basically. The power of the ability and the power of people to make change if necessary. No matter how shit it gets, no matter how bad it can get, as long as people stick together and push towards change, it can happen. It might not be the change that you want, but it can certainly change can certainly happen.
Definitely. There was a quote by someone that is never stop believing that if nothing else, things can change.
Exactly. There we go.
So,
and on that note, I suppose I'm gonna fall off my chair if I don't wrap it up now.
No, it's been a really good episode. I've enjoyed it. Not that I don't enjoy the other ones, but I've enjoyed it. It's been informative, good to listen to.
Good. So we've got a draw later to figure out what our next set of brains gone pods are going to. What our next set of pods are going to be.
Yes, we're going to release that. The draw will come out. This will be Sunday night, and the draw will come out Monday night because we're just catching up because we missed a week last week. So, if you're listening to this tomorrow night, you can listen to our draw episode, and then the following week will be the first of whatever we draw out.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so we'll join you next time then.
See you. Cheers, James. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye. See you next time.
Do you remember you were talking about that boat and how it spent 3 months to get there and it sank when it got there?
Yeah.
On Wednesday, I was with our good friend Nick Sale,
Oh, was you?
And Jenny and Dave. And do you remember we stayed the night at his house and we spent about 45 minutes setting up advanced Cluedo?
Yeah, yeah.
And just before we started playing it, he got up to go to the toilet, stood on it, and ruined it all.
Yeah. Do remember that.
But that's how those Russians felt. Maybe a bit more extreme than that, but
I think they were all dead.
yeah, true. Yeah, yeah, but there would have been a point where they were just swimming, watching the stern of the boat sinking, going, "This is a bit of a pain in the arse. This, what a waste of time."
Yeah, imagine, you'd be devastated.